All right, so this is your first time with Levinas. Let's see how it went on a scale from 1 to 10. So, any tens for Levinas? Any brave souls actually like this? No? Okay. 9, 8, wow, 7, not very popular. 6, oh, okay, core. Shepherd, okay, 5. Okay, here come the haters. 4, oh, Ahmad and Ho Cueva. 3, 2, 1, 0. There's a bunch of you without your cameras. Colon, Aslam, Castaneda, Barrera, Almulaiki,
That's
Del.
because I'm making sense to you real quick. That's why. But I'm here. I'm listening.
Good, good. All right, thank you. Aslam, Castaneda.
Yeah, just give me 1 second, Professor. Let me just change my background. Hold on.
All right, good. Okay, much better, much better. Okay, let's start with the the haters. Let's see. There was Ahmad, Ho, and Cueva. We are listening. What happened? So Ahmad, you can go, then Ho, then Cueva.
I don't hate it. I would say I'm indifferent.
It's even worse.
Yeah, I, I, when I was reading it for the first time, I thought he was talking about transcendence, and he also mentions phenomenology, and so I thought he was speaking with that flow. I thought he was saying he was pro phenomenology, but then as I went back to it, I saw that he's against it.
No, he is a phenomenologist, but he is stretching the concepts of phenomenology. If you take the class in the fall that I'll teach on Levinas, I'll show how he he is using phenomenology, but he has to stretch because phenomenology is applied to objects. Phenomenology is the science of how we relate to objects. But when you talk about the other, it's a different kind of object. So he has to stretch the concepts that Husserl, right, the father of phenomenology, used. So he is still very much a phenomenologist, but he has to now kind of pull the concepts right in order to make them fit kind of the others. So he is, even though he is stretching things, right? Does that make sense, Ahmad, for at least the time being? Okay. Cueva, tell us.
Yeah, when I was reading through it, mm, mm, I had a hard time trying to understand what he was trying to say.
Normal, yeah.
Like, um, I can't quite remember, but like he was talking about the idea of being. I didn't quite understand that, and like, uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember much, but
Yeah, no, that's good. It's
that was
just
quite difficult.
yeah, with
Quite
Levinas, you
difficult.
can go line by line and take an hour on each line. That's that's how rich it is, right? It's very dense, very dense. And he's alluding to the whole history of philosophy. So you got to know everybody. Descartes, Plato, Heidegger, they're all here, right? He's in a way speaking to all of them, right? That's why it's so complex. Good. Ho, you wanna continue?
Yeah, I would agree with what Corva said. I'm more like neutral to the reading itself because like I feel like all these readings they're kind of like difficult in their own way. Like the author will always write very intellectually, makes it hard for like the average reader to understand. And I don't know, I thought it was interesting how the author was talking about the absence of God. I think what they meant by this was because of like their religious background. I think they're Jewish. I think he was talking about the Holocaust, right?
Yes, absolutely, right? The whole text, the Holocaust is everywhere. So very nice perception here, Ho. Very well done. Okay, there's one lover, which was Core. Core, help us.
I didn't like necessarily love it. I more like resonated with it because I thought like even though the Holocaust is something that's like extreme to like go through, I've been through like my share of pain like we all have where I felt like we do tend to believe that God isn't present because it's like why is all this happening when if God exists. Like yesterday when I was like watching the news, I was writing my assignment while watching it, and I was just thinking, like, if George Floyd died and we all saw the video, why does he get justice exactly a year later? Like, why is that delay, you know? It's just, I
At
started
least
thinking
he
that, where
got
is God?
at least he got justice.
Yeah, it's just, I started thinking that, yeah,
Which is the
that's what it
first
meant.
time. This is historic, right?
Yeah.
That somebody. Okay, let's not get into that, but it's true. A year later, we're very sluggish as a country. We're moving very slowly towards justice, as Martin Luther King used to say. Islam, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think basically, it's the process takes a long time. So yeah, like a year, like jury and like, but it does take a long time. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so let's get into the text. So again, we're going to talk about two things. Today, I'm going to talk about the eclipse of God, right? Which we mentioned last time. And then next time, I'll talk about ethics, right? But today, we'll talk strictly about this element of doubt, right? That is part of the spiritual experience, according to Levinas. So this is very different, right, from what we are used to, especially if we come from a Christian background, where we are told you have to have faith, right? In other words, no doubt, right? You need to believe, you need to, right? And Levinas here is saying something very different. He's saying, actually, your doubts are part of your spiritual experience. They're part of the journey, in a way very similar, remember, to Job, right? Job himself had questions, he was confused, and we saw later on that it was part of his journey. Maimonides says the same thing, so you can see this is the whole Jewish tradition, right? The emphasis there is on, there is an embrace in Judaism of the question as part of the journey. So here we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's start on page 66, right there in the big paragraph. So he's going to talk here about the concept of God, right? How philosophers have stumbled upon this concept, how philosophers have defined God, right? We know already that the traditional concepts are finished, right? The idea of God as omnipotent, God as all-loving, we have to throw that away. That doesn't work anymore in this context, right? We have to renew our vision of God. This is what Levinas is trying to bring us to, right? He's trying to shed the old vision, which doesn't work when it comes to the Holocaust, and come up with a new vision, right? So let's see a little bit what he has to say about how philosophy has stumbled on the concept of God. So page 66, as rational speech. Are you there? Put your hand in the screen if you're there. Okay. So, as rational speech, speaking of philosophy, philosophy loves reason, right? Philosophy is taken to move from evidence to evidence, directed to what is seen, to what shows itself, directed to the present, right? So what he means here is that philosophy is interested in evidence, is interested in truth, is interested in knowing, in understanding, in grasping. So you can already see how when it comes to God, philosophy is going to have a hard time, right? So philosophers are inclined. They want to understand, they want to grasp, they want to see clearly, right? This is what our reason desires. But then he acknowledges, right? He observes that philosophy has still stumbled. Because of this, philosophy has a trouble thinking about God. And he says this here. Third paragraph, and yet human thought. Put your hand in the screen if you're there. Okay. So he says, and yet human thought has known concepts, or has, as though mad, operated with notions in which the distinction between presence and absence was not clear-cut, was not as clear-cut as the idea of being. So here he's saying, when it comes to God, right, and he'll mention this later, right, we are stumbling upon a reality which is both present and absent, right? So philosophy loves everything to be clear, but when it comes to the concept of God, philosophy stumbles into both vision and blindness, right? God is both present and absent. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? He says this later, right? He explains this is, I'm talking about God. Such are the Platonic notions of the one, the good, such is the notion of God, right? So he's saying here, God is a concept. When we think about God as philosophers, we both see and we don't see. God is both present and absent. So let's talk a little bit, what does he mean by that? How is God both present and absent in our lives, right? Let's talk a little bit. Let's try to interpret what he means by that. How is God never completely present? Even if you're the most pious believer, right? And how is God never completely absent? Even if you're the most staunch atheist, right? So let me see a little bit how you would interpret this passage. Let me hear you on that a little bit. Islam, is that a hand or is that from before? Islam, your hand is up. Why? You're not hearing me. Okay. So let me hear you guys a little bit on this. What does it mean that God is both present and absent? Go ahead, Janakopoulos.
I think when you mean he's absent and present at the same time, is he's there and he has his own plan, but he's not present in the way that we want him to be. So in big events, like or even things in our lives, like if we want him to do something and he's not there, we'll say that he's absent, he doesn't care for us, that kind of thing.
Yes, kind of like Job, right? We want God to manifest like this and he doesn't, right? Job, remember, had a very fixed vision of God. He was expecting God to do this and God didn't do this. And so then we interpret, God is absent, but maybe God is simply doing something else, right? We never wonder about that, right? That maybe the plan is a little different from what we thought, right? So absolutely, right? God doesn't come, he doesn't, how shall I put it? He doesn't fit our expectations. And in that sense, we feel an absence, right? Nicely put. Let's see, who else? Islam, is that still your hand? Can you hear me, Islam? You look completely frozen. Okay, Al-Hadai, go ahead.
I have no idea, but maybe he's trying to say that he exists, but we can't see him. That way he's present, but not really.
And how do we know that he exists, Al-Hadai?
Don't know. You just it's a belief.
So how is it? So if we don't know, how is God present at all? Seems like he's completely absent. How is it that he's still present, even we don't know?
I'm gonna go back to Rumi. My heart,
Okay,
experiences.
He's absent when it comes to knowledge of the mind, but present to the heart. I like that. That's nice. I like that. So God, in a way, is absent when it comes to we don't understand, we can't see him, we can't analyze him, we can't see him in a microscope or with a telescope, but our hearts, senses, maybe a presence. Okay, nice. Let's see if there's anybody else. Okay. So yeah, so absolutely, right? This is and I mentioned, right, even for the believer, right, God is somewhat absent. Even for the atheist, God is somewhat present. Let me explain what I mean by that, right? For the believer, it's like Janakopoulos said, right? We sense God and so forth, but sometimes God doesn't respond in the way we expect him to, and so then we sense kind of a let down, right? And which we interpret as absence, like Job, right? Job was sensing the absence of God because he felt at the moment, right, when God stopped fitting within his expectations, it felt like an absence, even though it was still God, but moving in a different way than Job was expecting, right? The same thing with an atheist, right? There's God is clearly absent to the atheist, and yet, right, can we know for sure, right, that God is completely inexistent? We don't have either knowledge that God exists, but we don't have, neither do we have knowledge that God doesn't exist, right? So in that sense, you have a little bit microbe, right, tiny element that maybe he exists. In that sense, there is still some presence within the heart of the atheist, because you can never prove that he doesn't exist. Therefore, maybe he does. 5% chance, 1% chance, right? Presence. Am I making sense? Are you seeing? Let me give you another example, more common, right? So suppose you're one of those people who prays to God for parking spot. Anybody like that? Some of us are like that, somewhat superstitious. So you're praying, or you're praying for some kind of miracle, right? The miracle happens. Here you are going around to your friends, praising God, right? Ah, God did this. See, he answered my prayer. This is my miracle. And what are your friends going to say? Your friend's going to be like, well, it could have been a coincidence, right? It doesn't have to be God, or it could have been you, right? So everywhere where there is a manifestation of God, there is also the non-manifestation of God. It's something happened, something amazing happened, a miracle. It could be God, but maybe it couldn't, right? There's always, this is the nature of God. There's always, with every affirmation, the denial. Yes, maybe he did a miracle, but there again, it could be chance. Yes, he answered my prayer, but there again, it could be a coincidence, right? And so there's always accompanying any experience of God, there is this shroud of doubt, of mystery, of I don't know what's going on, right? That's what is meant here. Giannakopoulos, do you want to add?
Yeah, so I was agreeing with you because, a lot of times we prove that God is real through miracles, right? Like for myself, and it's like things that you can't explain, right? So we have these things called myrrh streaming icons, right? And in the icons, like they just start spewing myrrh, right? And you can't explain why, but you can see that through the wooden icon that's nothing, it's just a picture or a drawing, right? You can see that myrrh is actually coming forth from it. And, how do you explain that stuff? Oh, there's a hidden socket in the wood. It's kind of ridiculous. You're going to have dozens of icons like that, and it's like things, my dad, he went to Greece to pray for Saint Markella during like Saint Markella's names day. And, as they're saying the prayers over the ocean where she was killed by her father, the water started boiling in one specific spot, just started boiling. You can't explain, it's the sea. How do you explain the sea boiling, but just in that one spot? And then when they stopped the prayer, the water calmed down, it stopped boiling. It's through stuff that I believe, and that I believe that God is real. And that's how I prove that he's real,
And yet, right, when you tell the story, somebody might be tempted to say, did it really happen? Or did your father imagine? Or they collectively deluded themselves, right? I bet every single person in this class, while Giannakopoulos was talking, was thinking, yeah, but...
Like, it's so crazy. It's too crazy to believe.
Exactly.
That's the thing, But because it's so crazy and that it's inexplicable, that's why we believe.
Exactly.
And there were dozens of witnesses there. It wasn't just my dad. Don't get me wrong. Dozens of people there.
Absolutely, right? So you have the certainty, but at the same time, right? Someone might argue, well, how can you be sure that was God and not a natural phenomenon, or not maybe everyone imagining collectively, right? People, there's always, right? What Levinas is trying to say is that there cannot be certainty when it comes to God, right? Otherwise, it's not God, right? There's always, even in the most beautiful, miraculous experience like you're describing, a tiny percentage where you're like, right? Is this really a miracle, or is this something that science can explain, right? So I want to be very clear, right? For Levinas, it is actually not good to be fully certain, because what happens when you're fully certain? Is it still God when you're fully certain? There, I saw God. What is wrong with that when you're too certain about your experience of God? Al-Haddai, tell us.
Idolatry.
What?
Idolatry.
Yes, explain. Remind us. Remind us.
We have like a specific idea of God, and we've always been for him to reach that.
Right. In a way, you reduce God to a perception. You reduce God to your own experience, right? And God is always so much more, right? And can we reduce God to a miracle, right? Or to something that we experience in that sense, right? Ahmad, tell us a little bit about Job's friends. You were saying it in the chat.
It's really as what you just described. Job's friends thought they knew everything there is to know about God and just fixated him and put God in a box, per se.
Yeah, absolutely right. So this is when we get into certainties, there is always a danger. And that's what Levinas is sensing. That's why he's preaching to us, right? God is always, must be a little bit absent. If he's too present, in a way, he has become locked into your own representation, into your own experience, and there's no room for anything else, right? And at that moment becomes dangerous because now you know God. No, and then now you begin to impose your vision of God onto others, right? So that's where Levinas is making a lot of sense, in my view, right? God must be seen always. There must be a small element of mystery or question, otherwise it's not God, it's an idol, like Al-Haddai said very well, right? If God is to the measure of your perception, that's a very small God. If you can understand and know God, he's become very small. Right? It's not God anymore, it's a concept, right? Whereas what Levinas is saying, God is always overflowing our perception. That's what God is, right? Let me write this down. This is a good quote. God is always, or must always, overflow our perception. Why? Because if he doesn't overflow, he's a God that in a way is captured. He can be, because then he can be captured by our concept, right? And that's a very small God indeed, right? By our mind, and that's a very small God indeed, right? And this is what Al-Haddai meant by idolatry, right? A God that can be captured by our mind, where we are, yes, I'm sure this is God. This is not God. God always overflows. God is always, you know, jolting us. God is always making us uncomfortable. God is always, right, exceeding our expectations or disappointing our expectations or going in a different direction than we thought he would, right? Or shocking us, right? Or telling us to do things we can't believe we were doing, right? So this is, you are in touch with the true God when there is always a lingering question of what is going on. Right? As long as you know what's going on, this is not God. But if you're truly following God, you're always thinking in the deep of yourself, what's going on? Where are we going? What's happening? I don't see, right? This is the sure sign you're following God. If there's a little bit of confusion and disorientation and you're overwhelmed and you're not sure, like Job, right? So that's what Levinas means, like God must be both presence and absence, right? Okay, he says this here in a quote, this idea that we need this duality of, by the way, first of all, Giannakopoulos, are you following what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying about the danger of certainties? Are you here? Yes. Giannakopoulos, respond, please. Giannakopoulos? I see you, but I don't hear you. Yes, Giannakopoulos, can you respond? Do you see the danger that Levinas is sensing in any type of certainty? Like, oh, that proof made me believe, so I see clearly that must have been God.
Yeah, so we also say that too. I remember one time I was confessing to my priest, and he was saying, you have to be careful with doubt, but having a little bit of doubt is also very powerful, because that little bit of doubt can lead to you understanding and achieving greater heights.
That's the idea.
And which is like I didn't even think about that at the time, but when he said that to me, I was like, that is so true.
Yeah.
And when you're 100% certain of one thing, it's like you think you know them, right? But like, let's say you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? You're like, oh, I know this person 100% inside and out. And then next month they show their true colors, and you're like, oh, I guess I really didn't know this person, right? Yeah. So you fall into this sense of what's the word, like when you're being lackadaisical, like you're being lazy almost, because you think, oh, I've already reached this point where I should be at, but then you realize later, you're like, oh no, I actually don't know anything at all.
That's it. Absolutely. You got it. That's the idea, right? There must always be a small element of confusion, of doubt, of I'm not sure where this is going type of thing when you are in the spiritual journey. You should not be seeing clearly if you're in the spiritual journey, right? If you're seeing clearly, you're not on a spiritual journey. You're doing your own thing over here, right? Spiritual journey implies vision, but also blindness, right? These are both Connected. Okay, so let's look at the quote with regards to this notion that God always remains a little bit hidden, otherwise it's not God. And by the way, well, yeah, let's go to the quote first. Page 75. Okay, now the big paragraph on 75, go to the middle where you have in parentheses the word IL. Do you see it? Put your hand in the screen if you're there. IL, the French word IL, in the middle of the big paragraph. Can I see your hands again? Sorry. I want to see. Okay, great. Okay, so right there in the middle of the second paragraph on page 75, you have in parentheses IL. I'm reading from there. The enigma comes to us from eleity. Let's skip that for now. The enigma is the way of the absolute foreign to cognition, right? So what he's talking about here is God. And he says God is always going to be enigma and not phenomenon. So let's explain a little bit these two words, right? What's a phenomenon? Anybody know? Ahmad, you would know because you were talking about it. Tell us. What's a phenomenon?
Like an experience. I'm having trouble explaining it.
The philosophical definition of phenomenon, or the Greek. Janakopoulos, you need to help us. This is a Greek word. An experience you can't really describe. Nope. It's the opposite.
It's something that you know what it is, but it's like kind of beyond our understanding.
So you guys are talking about the popular definition of phenomenon, right? Phenomenon in the Greek simply means that which is manifest, right? That which you can see, that which is visible. Phenomenon, right? So when Levinas is saying God is an enigma and not a phenomenon, he's saying God is not something, is not a phenomenon in the sense that you can see clearly what it is. Enigma. You cannot see clearly what it is. So that's what he's saying. The enigma, God is an enigma, not a phenomenon, is the way of the absolute, absolute meaning God, foreign to cognition. It always overwhelms our mind. Maybe our hearts understand, although Levinas doesn't talk about that at all, right? He's just saying we can't figure it out. It's beyond our understanding. We're always going to be confused, right? Okay, now, there's another reason why God chooses to reveal himself both as presence and absence. And this reason has to do with God's seductive approach. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So this is the second reason why God doesn't appear clearly visible, certain, right? I mean, I had a friend once who was going through an agnostic phase. And we were talking about God, and he was saying, you know, I'll believe in God if tomorrow this tree in my back, or if he had just an empty backyard. He said, if tomorrow a tree grows in my backyard, then I'll believe in God, right? So clear, right? It's going to be clear. It's going to be for sure. He was trying to not have the absence, just the presence, right? So we know God doesn't appear like that because otherwise it wouldn't be God. He would be your slave or your idol, right? But there's another reason which has to do in the way that God chooses to approach us, which is a seductive way. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let me introduce first of all, and this is great advice for y'all who want to learn how to seduce. We're going to talk about seduction between lovers, and then we'll see how God is seducing us. Okay? So imagine you're in a bar. Let's be very gender. Let's be sexist about this. So you're a guy. You're trying to get this girl, right? So you've already located her. She's sitting there drinking something. What should you not do in the first conversation with her? What are some things you should not do? Which would ruin everything. She would never want to talk to you again after that. Let's hear it. This is good. Listen up so you know not to do that. Talk to her. You shouldn't talk to her. Gitis, come on now. Why? you don't stand a chance if you don't talk to her. Argitis, explain to us. You're very strict. If you're a man, you're not going to talk to her? Argitis, speak up. We need you to clarify. This is worrying. So audio is not working. Okay, continue to explain in the chat. Okay, here's Adu saying, ask her to go back home with you. Okay, absolutely, right? You come, if you've just met her and you're trying to, start something, you don't say, hey, after 10 minutes, want to go to my house? Like, no, I don't know you, right? So that would ruin everything. She would be immediately putting you in the category of the creep, right? What else should you not do or say when you first see her? Suppose, okay, yeah, Barrera, yes. Yeah, you look cute, but that woman over there is cuter. But I'm with you because so yes, obviously. What would be suppose you've had a crush on her for a while and you're actually in love with her, right? And now here she is. What should you okay, Adu's very good at this. Adu, you're very good at this. Okay, don't over compliment, but especially what if you're super in love? Should you be truthful and honest with her? Adu is like, no, why not? You be truthful. What's wrong with telling her right away that, what's wrong with being sincere? Okay, leave her wanting more. Myra, that's weird. Okay, are you seeing how if the man is too forward, right, too clear, what happens to the woman? She's like, okay. Like I don't have time to make a decision. You've already overwhelmed me with too much information, right? So, and she'll lose interest. Okay, excellent, Adu. I give you a plus on seduction skills. Well done. Right? Absolutely. So it's the same with God. If God barges into our lives and God comes in one morning to you and says, I am God, worship me. What are you going to do? Who are you? Right? You'll be like, who the hell are you? I don't know you. Right? Did we meet for you to come barging in like this and telling me to worship you? Right? So God, in a way, proceeds little by little, reveals a little, hides a little, reveals a little, hides a little. And it is to the degree that we are receptive that he reveals more and more. This is the art of seduction that God is using with us, right? So let me say it again. One of the reasons that God is not just present, clear, here I am, God, worship me, earth, right? Is that he's trying to create a connection. And to create a connection, you got to go slowly, gradually, allow the person the space to get to know you, to grow some feelings. And so he will appear and disappear. Appear and disappear. This is great dating advice, by the way. Appear and disappear. Appear and disappear. Don't be always there, right? You want to have moments where you're not. And then you're back. And he will appear more and more to the degree that we are receptive. So let's see how Levinas puts this. He's talking, the whole thing is right here on page 70. Okay, go to page 70, the third paragraph, right in the middle. A lover makes an advance. Tell me when you're there. Put your hand in the screen over there. So third paragraph, right in the middle, a lover makes an advance. Okay, I have like 2 people. I need 1 more. Okay, thank you, Adu. Okay, so here he's comparing. He's going to compare the way God approaches us to the way a lover approaches, right? A man approaches a woman. So he says that a lover makes an advance. You're going to make a move. But the provocative or seductive gesture has, if one likes, not interrupted the decency of the conversation and attitudes. In other words, you do it, but you're subtle. You're not going to be, right? So for example, suppose you want to see her again. You're not going to tell her, let's go to my apartment, right? Like Adu, I think it was saying. You're going to say, hey, in a week, right? I'm going with some friends to this place, would you like to join us? So it feels like it's just friendship, but it could be more, right? This is perfect. The ambiguity is perfect, right? You're inviting her. It seems like you're making a move, but at the same time, it's very neutral. It's a group of friends. It's next week, right? It's subtle. That's what he means here. Lover makes an advance, but he's subtle, not straight up, right? Not direct. It's like, it's a little ambiguous. Continuing. If one likes not, it withdraws as lightly as it slipped in. So God reveals and then quickly pulls back like a lover. Would you like to come hang out with us in a week with a bunch of friends? And then waits for your answer, right? Based on how you answer, the person will know whether they can go to the next step, right? That's what he says here. A God was revealed on the mountain, right? Or in a burning bush, this is allusion to God revealing himself to the Hebrews on Mount Sinai, right? And to Moses in a burning bush. Or was attested to in scripture? So we have scriptures about God. And then he says, what if it were just a storm? Here's the doubt, right? What if the scriptures was written by dreamers who imagined the whole thing, right? So on the one hand, you have this powerful revelation. On the other hand, you're not sure. This is the seduction. Here I am. Here I go. Here I am. Here I withdraw. Here I reveal. Here I withdraw. I'm waiting to see how ready are you for more. This is God, right? He gives a little and then sees, is the person ready for more? If you open up, gives a little more. You don't open up, withdraws a little more, right? Just like a seductive lover. And then he says this, it is up to us, or more exactly, it is up to me to retain or to repel this God without boldness. In other words, if God gives you a sign or something happens where you start to think, maybe there is a God, but I'm not sure, but maybe there is. To the extent that you're like, well, maybe there is. I'm not saying, this is nothing. To the extent that you say maybe there is, you'll get another sign and another sign. And to the extent that you're open, you'll get deeper and deeper revelations of God. But to the extent that you dismiss it, there will be a withdrawal, and then maybe trying again a few months later, right? Are you seeing how this works? Put your hand in the screen if you're following what I'm saying, right? So this is how we can explain, right? Some of us are saying, well, I don't feel like God is at all, right, present in my life, right? What Levinas would say is ask yourself, right? How open are you to a revelation, right? What Levinas is saying is that God reveals himself to the degree that we are open to him. Let me write this down, right? God reveals himself to the degree that we are open to him. And so he's always testing the waters, right? Gives you a sign, gives you a small miracle, gives you a synchronicity, right? Something synchronous or something interesting, right? An answer to a desire or a hidden prayer, right? You get something where you're like, oh, this is, maybe there is God, right? If you don't dismiss it, you'll get more and more and more. If you dismiss it, you'll get less and less and less, right? To the degree that you push it away. It is really up to us how much revelation we get, because God, in a way, is trying to connect. He's not trying to impose, right? To impose, he would just arrive on the scene and be like, bow down before me, I am your creator, right? No discussion, right? But because he's trying to connect and build a relationship, he's proceeding without boldness for our sake, to give us time to open up, right? So one of you put in the chat, is it the same as Marcel's presence? Ahmad, what do you think? Explain what you mean by Marcel's presence and how you're connecting to this.
When we were going over Marcel, you said that the more you're open to being, the more you're going to experience it.
Yes, that's exactly. Wow, I never saw that connection. That makes sense. Yes, absolutely. Remember, I talked about Marcel when I said one of you, I still don't know who, asked, how do we connect to being since we are disconnected? And Marcel says you can't look for it, but you can be permeable, right? This was the technical term that Marcel uses, meaning open, right? When you have an expression of being, an experience of being through hope or the feeling of faith or the feeling of presence, when you have these feelings, don't shut them down, right? Don't dismiss them. Be open to them and to what they're trying to tell you. And the more you're open and permeable, the more being will begin to manifest itself through these experiences. So yes, this is exactly the same thing, except of course for Levinas, God is out there, right? God is more transcendent than for Marcel, for whom being was within us, right? Was surging within us through these feelings. But yes, exactly the same thing. Nice connection, Ahmed, right? So yeah, okay, great. So now you're seeing a little bit, right? How this passage actually explains why maybe some of us have a greater sense of the presence of God and some of us don't, right? What Levinas is inviting us to do is, well, try to be more open to the possibility and try to accept the signs and the gifts and the graces and the small miracles, right, as significant, right? And then you might get more and more, right, in that sense. Now, Levinas, actually, this is the only time, right, we're going to be talking about God in this way, right? This is a very rare passage in Levinas where he's hinting at a possible connection with God, which we know in the post-Holocaust context is ultimately going to be rejected, right? So actually, Levinas ultimately will not move in this direction, right? He's not going to enter the dance of seduction, and I'm going to tell you why right now. Let me give you first of all, so yeah, let me explain why, and then I'll give you a story that we have about Levinas. So the main reason, right, why Levinas is going to opt out of this kind of vertical connection, personal connection with God, which he is writing about here, right? You can sense that he's aware of the possibility of being wooed by God, of being seduced by God, of being, in a way, captured, right, by God. But in the end, he's going to actually move away from that possibility. The main reason is that for Levinas, there is in him the trauma of the Holocaust, which I forgot to mention in the introduction. Levinas didn't just get caught in a war camp. His whole family, right, his extended family in the Ukraine, they all got deported and killed, right, by the Nazis. So Levinas is not just somebody who served in the army and saw the war. He's also someone who lost his whole family to the war, right? So when you come from that place of being the survivor, there is an inability to receive happiness, right? And some of you who are survivors of someone who died or committed suicide and so forth, you know how guilty, thank you, Adu, right? You putting the words out of my mouth, right? You have a certain amount of shame and guilt of yourself enjoying life when they can't enjoy life, right? And so Levinas is suffering from survivor's guilt. And so this idea of, this connection with God, which would be just such an amazing connection of love and comfort and peace, right? In a way, he chooses to walk away from it out of respect for the victims of the Holocaust who were not able to have this comfort and this peace and instead were gassed and genocided, right? So let me write this in the chat, right? So out of respect for the dead, right? Levinas opts out of a personal relationship with God, right? One where he could find, right, comfort and so forth, right? So in a way, even though you can sense that in this text, he's aware of the wooing, right? He knows that God is trying to seduce him. In a way, he will turn his back on that because for him, he cannot be comforted. He is in a way refusing to be comforted, right? Levinas is refusing to be comforted out of respect for the dead, right? If they were not comforted, why should I be comforted, right? And so Levinas will then turn away from the personal relationship with God to the realm of ethics. For him, the only legitimate place left, he could, right? The only legitimate place that he feels wouldn't be a disrespect to the victims is to find God in the face of the other, right? So Levinas is going to shift from a personal relationship from a vertical relationship to a horizontal relationship with the other. So for him, the only way to connect to God without betraying the victims is to connect to God through the face of the other, which we'll talk about next time, right? So let me say that here in the chat, right? Levinas shifts from vertical relationship, right? So personal relationship, right, to horizontal relationship with God, right, where God is encountered through the other, right? No more personally, but through the other. Okay, so we'll see that he does this in the next phase of this text. But let me tell you a little bit the story, right, which illustrates the way that he walks away. There's a beautiful story about Levinas shortly after the war. So remember, he's lost his whole extended family, and he's kind of in limbo for several years, right? I mean, he's teaching, he's writing, but it's not, you know, you can sense that there is a kind of standstill in his life, right? So he's walking around in the streets in Paris, I believe. And in France, which is a Catholic country, even though it refuses to acknowledge it, right, you have these churches that are open, right? The Catholic churches are always open. So he wanders into one of those, right? This is really a moment of confusion. So he wanders into one of those. And the first thing he sees when he enters is this magnificent portrait of, this is a story in the Hebrew Bible of Hannah, right? This is a story that he's familiar with, right, from the Hebrew Bible. And so let me briefly tell you the story of Hannah so that you can understand what he's seeing when he enters this church. So Hannah is a woman who couldn't have children, and she was very distressed about it. And one day she went into the temple and she just started to just bawl. That's really the word. She was just all over the place, crying, weeping, you know, over this issue, right? She had so much pressure about this thing. She was really feeling like her life was over. So she was there weeping her heart out and really laying out her despair before God, right? And it's an interesting story because the priest thought she was drunk and he was about to kick her out when she explained to him that she wasn't drunk, she was just in despair, right? So the priest, you know, kind of caught himself and said, okay, go in peace, you'll get what you need. And indeed, she became pregnant right after that. But what Levinas is seeing in this painting is her depicted in the moment where she is weeping, right, before God and pouring her grief and her frustration and her despair out to God, right? And he's witnessing this. And the story goes that Levinas stood a long time before this painting, right? As though there was something pulling him to this experience, as though perhaps he could also pour out his heart, right? And grieve and mourn and just weep over everything that had happened and lay it all out to God. And in the end, Levinas actually chooses to just walk away, right? He, in a way, is refusing to be comforted. To refuse to weep before God is to refuse to be comforted, right? So in a way, he opts out of this kind of relationship that Hannah had, right? Hannah had so much on her chest and she was just bringing it and connecting, right? So Levinas actually chooses to opt out of this powerful experience he could have had, right? As the woman Hannah, and he walks away. And from then on, you will never hear him talk about this again, right? There is nowhere in Levinas that I have read so far where he mentions this type of seductive approach, possible connection, right? Personal connection with God. Everything else now will be finding God in the face of the other. This is the only place where he feels he can honorably find God without betraying, right, his own family. Make sense? Put your hand if you're with me. Okay, great. All right, any questions? We have 2 minutes for questions. Whoever didn't understand what I'm saying, now is the time. Okay. Next time, I think, what did I sign? Yeah, I don't know, just read what I signed. But next time we'll be focusing on page 76, just so you know, the whole section on ethics. So you can actually just, you know, focus on that if you want. The section called ethics, right? This is what I'll be commenting next time. So this is now Levinas, right? Turning away from God towards people, right? In order to find God. So it's a long, long winding road back for him. Okay. Great. So next time, yes, we're gonna do that, which is when, what day are we? Where are we in the week? I don't know. Somebody tell me. What day are we? I seriously don't know. Thank you. Wednesday. So next week. All right. Next week we'll be doing Levinas. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Adu. All right, guys. I will see you later. Let me stop the recording.